Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the old studio, landing softly on the wooden floor like a memory that refused to fade. The room was quiet, but not empty. It held echoes, laughter once shared, lines once rehearsed, pauses once filled with meaning. He stood near the window, coffee cooling in his hand, watching dust dance in the sunlight. Time had moved on, but some moments stayed, fresh and vivid, as if they had just happened yesterday. She arrived without announcement, the door opening with a familiar sound that made him turn before he realized why. Their eyes met, and for a second, the world narrowed to that simple exchange. No rush, no surprise, just recognition. The kind that comes from having shared countless hours under bright lights and quiet corners alike. They greeted each other easily, not with the excitement of a reunion staged for an audience, but with the calm warmth of two people who knew how to sit comfortably in shared silence. The studio had been chosen for a small project, something reflective, something meant to honor moments that viewers still spoke about with affection. Nothing grand, nothing loud, just honest work. As they settled into the space, the director's voice drifted in from the hallway, discussing angles and timing. Yet neither of them was listening closely. Their attention was on the subtle rhythm that had always existed between them, a rhythm built on trust, respect, and an unspoken understanding of how to give and receive space. They began rehearsing a simple scene. No dramatic turns, no raised voices. Just two characters sharing a conversation over tea. He listened as she spoke her lines, not as a performer waiting for his cue, but as a person absorbing every nuance. The way she paused before certain words. The way her eyes softened at the end of a sentence. These were the details that viewers remembered. These were the moments that still felt alive. She noticed his attention and smiled slightly, adjusting her posture before continuing. The scene flowed naturally, as if it had been waiting patiently to be revisited. The director called for a cut, satisfied, but neither of them moved right away. There was no need to rush. The moment deserved to breathe. During the break, they sat at a small table near the back of the studio. 2 cups of tea steamed gently between them. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace, unaware of the quiet significance unfolding inside. She spoke about how often people still mention certain scenes, certain looks exchanged on screen that seemed to say more than dialogue ever could. He nodded, thoughtful. He had heard the same stories. Messages from viewers who said those moments reminded them of their own experiences, first connections, unspoken feelings, the beauty of simplicity. It was never about perfection. It was about sincerity. They discussed how rare it was to create something that lingered in people's hearts without trying too hard. How the most lasting impressions often came from restraint, from allowing emotion to surface naturally instead of forcing it forward. Their conversation was gentle, reflective, and free of nostalgia's weight. They weren't looking back with longing. They were acknowledging what had been with gratitude. The next scene took place near the window. The script called for them to stand side by side, looking out at the city, sharing a quiet moment before parting ways. As the camera rolled, the room seemed to fade again, leaving only the two of them and the soft hum of something unspoken. He shifted slightly to give her more light. She noticed, adjusting her position in return. Small gestures, instinctive and kind. When the scene ended, the director smiled, clearly pleased. There was no need for many takes. The first had captured exactly what was needed. Freshness didn't come from novelty. It came from honesty. And honesty, they both knew, had always been their strongest shared language. As the day went on, the studio filled with gentle energy. Crew members moved quietly, respectful of the tone being set. Even laughter was soft, careful not to break the mood. Between scenes, they shared stories unrelated to work, books they had read, places they wanted to visit, simple joys that grounded them beyond the screen. Late afternoon light painted the walls in warm hues as they wrapped the final scene of the day. She gathered her things slowly, not out of reluctance, but appreciation. He waited by the door, holding it open as they stepped into the hallway together. Before parting, they paused. No dramatic farewell. Just a shared look that acknowledged the day for what it was, a reminder that some moments, when created with care, never truly fade. They remain fresh, not because time stands still, but because meaning endures. They went their separate ways, footsteps echoing softly in opposite directions. Behind them, the studio lights dimmed, but the warmth of what had been created lingered. Somewhere, viewers would one day watch these moments and feel that same quiet connection, unaware of the calm, respectful bond that made it all possible. The door closed gently, and the studio returned to silence, holding yet another memory, ready to stay fresh for those who believed in the power of simple, sincere moments. The city felt different in the early evening, as if it were slowing down just enough to let thoughts catch up. Streetlights blinked on one by one, casting long reflections on the pavement. He walked without hurry, hands in his pockets, replaying fragments of the day in his mind, not scenes, not lines, but moments in between. The quiet smiles, the shared pauses, the ease that never needed explanation. Across town, she sat by a window, watching the sky shift from soft blue to deep amber. A book lay open on her lap, unread. Her thoughts drifted instead to how certain collaborations never really end. They simply change shape. Some live on screen, some in memory, and some in the way people continue to talk about them long after the cameras stop. Messages from viewers appeared regularly, even now. Thoughtful words. Gentle appreciation. People spoke about scenes that made them feel understood, about connections that felt real in a world often filled with noise. She never took those messages lightly. She knew how rare it was for something fictional to feel honest enough to stay with someone. The next morning, the studio welcomed them again, but today's atmosphere was lighter. Sunlight poured in more boldly, and the crew chatted more freely. Today's work focused on movement rather than dialogue, simple actions that carried meaning without words. Sitting, standing, turning away, then back again. The kind of moments that viewers often remembered most. They rehearsed a scene where their characters shared a quiet walk. No destination mentioned. No problem to solve. Just companionship. As they practiced, their steps naturally fell into sync. No effort required. It was as if the rhythm had always been there, waiting patiently to be resumed. The director watched closely, saying very little. Sometimes guidance was unnecessary when trust did the work. The camera followed them, capturing the space between their movements, the subtle shifts in expression. Freshness, once again, came not from novelty, but from presence. During lunch, they sat with a few crew members, exchanging stories that had nothing to do with filming. Laughter flowed easily, unforced. These were the moments that never made it to the screen, but somehow influenced everything that did. Comfort translated into authenticity, and authenticity reached people in ways nothing else could. Later, they filmed a scene that viewers would likely talk about for years. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was restrained. Their characters sat across from each other, sharing a simple meal. A pause stretched between them, not awkward, but full. The kind of pause where emotions gathered quietly, waiting to be felt rather than spoken. When the scene ended, the room stayed still for a moment longer than usual. Even the crew sensed it. No one rushed to reset. Some moments deserved respect. The director eventually nodded, satisfied, and quietly called for a break. She stepped outside for some air, the cool breeze brushing against her face. He joined her a moment later, standing at a comfortable distance. They didn't speak right away. The city sounds filled the space, distant traffic, faint voices, life continuing as always. It's interesting, she said finally, her voice calm, how people remember the quiet parts the most. He agreed. Loud scenes faded faster. Subtle ones stayed. They left room for viewers to bring their own feelings, their own stories. That was where the real connection happened. As filming continued, the day unfolded smoothly. Scene after scene captured moments that felt lived in, not performed. The crew worked efficiently, but without pressure. Everyone understood the goal, to create something that felt timeless, something that would remain gentle no matter how many times it was revisited. By the final scene, the light had softened again, wrapping the studio in a warm glow. Their characters shared a final look, no promises made, no conclusions drawn, just understanding. The camera lingered, then cut. Applause followed, brief and sincere. Not celebration, but appreciation. They thanked the crew, exchanged kind words, and gathered their belongings. Another day complete, another collection of moments added to something larger than any single project. As they left the studio together, they paused at the entrance. The street outside was alive, full of movement and sound. Real life waited, as it always did. They wished each other well, their goodbye unremarkable in the best possible way. Later that evening, somewhere far away, a viewer would stumble upon an old clip, replaying it with the same fondness as before. They would feel that familiar warmth, that sense of connection that hadn't dimmed with time. They might not know why it felt so real. They wouldn't need to. Freshness wasn't about being new. It was about being true. And as long as truth remained at the heart of those moments, viewers would continue to return to them, finding comfort, familiarity, and a quiet reminder that simplicity, when done with care, never fades. Rain arrived without warning, soft at first, then steady enough to blur the edges of the city. The studio windows carried the sound gently, like background music meant to slow everything down. Inside, the lights were dimmer today, adjusted to match the mood of the scenes they were preparing to film. A different rhythm filled the space, quieter, deeper, reflective. He reviewed the script alone for a moment, standing near a chair that had been placed deliberately off-center. The scene was simple. Two people meeting after time had passed, not to resolve anything, but to acknowledge what still existed. No explanations. No questions. Just presence. He appreciated scripts like this. They trusted the audience. She entered moments later, umbrella folded neatly in her hand. Raindrops clung to the edges, catching the light before falling away. She looked around the studio, absorbing the calm, then met his gaze. There was a shared understanding before a single word was spoken. Today's work would require stillness, more than movement. They took their positions as the crew settled. The director spoke briefly, reminding everyone to let silence do its job. The camera rolled. Their characters sat across from each other, hands resting calmly, eyes attentive. The rain outside became part of the scene, its steady rhythm filling the pauses between breaths. He looked at her, not searching for answers, but recognizing something familiar. She returned the look with the same quiet certainty. Time seemed to stretch. Viewers, one day, would likely lean forward during the scene without realizing why. Nothing obvious happened, yet everything felt important. A slight shift in posture. A breath taken a second longer than usual. These were the details that lingered. When the scene ended, the director waited before calling cut. He wanted the moment to finish on its own terms. Eventually, the camera stopped, but the stillness remained for a few heartbeats longer. Then the crew exhaled collectively, moving again, gently. During a short break, they sat apart, each lost in thought. Scenes like that stayed with a person, even when the workday moved on. She reflected on how viewers often described feeling seen during moments like these. Not entertained. Understood. He thought about how trust shaped performances more than technique ever could. Trust in the story. Trust in the person across from you. Trust that subtlety would be enough. The next scene shifted slightly in tone. Their characters stood side by side, watching the rain through a large window. No dialogue was written. The script simply said, "They share the moment." That was all. They didn't rehearse this one much. Overthinking would only take away from it. When the camera rolled, they allowed the environment to guide them. The rain, the light, the quiet awareness of another presence nearby. She folded her arms loosely, not out of cold, but comfort. He adjusted his stance, giving her space while remaining close enough to feel connected. The camera captured the balance effortlessly. Cut. The director smiled, clearly satisfied. Sometimes the best decisions were the simplest ones, letting things unfold naturally. The crew moved efficiently, resetting for the final scene of the day. As afternoon faded into evening, the rain slowed, leaving the city washed clean. The last scene took place near the studio entrance. Their characters prepared to leave, knowing they might not meet again. There was no sadness written into the script, just acceptance. She reached for the door first, then paused, turning back slightly. He didn't step forward. He didn't step away. He stayed exactly where he was. That choice mattered. The camera caught it. They shared a final look, not longing, not regret. Just appreciation. The door opened. Light from outside spilled in briefly, then disappeared as it closed behind her.
Cut.
The director called it a wrap for the day. Quiet applause followed, respectful and brief. The crew began packing up, voices low, as if not to disturb what had just been created. She returned to gather her things, moving unhurriedly. He waited nearby, holding a coat he had picked up for her without thinking. She noticed, thanked him with a smile, and accepted it. Small gestures carried weight in moments like these. They walked out together into the cool evening air. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the streets reflective and calm. The city lights shimmered softly, mirrored on the pavement. They stood for a moment under the awning, neither rushing to leave. The project was nearing its end, and with it came that familiar mix of completion and quiet reflection. Not sadness, just awareness. It's always the simple scenes, she said thoughtfully, that people talk about the longest. He agreed. Complexity often impressed, but simplicity stayed. It allowed space for viewers to step inside, to see themselves without being told what to feel. They said their goodbyes gently, each heading in a different direction. No promises. No expectations. Just respect for what had been shared and created. Days later, edits would be made, music added softly, scenes woven together carefully. Eventually, viewers would watch. Some would smile. Some would pause the screen, replaying certain moments without fully knowing why. Those moments would feel fresh, not because they were new, but because they were honest. Because they trusted silence. Because they reflected something real. And somewhere, long after the rain had dried and the studio lights had dimmed, those quiet scenes would continue to live on, unchanged by time, waiting patiently for anyone who needed a reminder that meaningful connections don't have to be loud to last.